Hello and welcome. I would first like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongvar people here in Los Angeles, where I am connecting with all of you from today. I think it's important to acknowledge the land because growing up here as an immigrant, I actually never heard the traditional names of the territories. And Indigenous people were talked about in the past tense, their struggles were talked about in the past tense. And when we do that, it makes it easier to deny Indigenous people their rights and historicize their struggles, which they are still going through today. And as an activist, and today particularly as this panel is about activism, I would like to take this opportunity to commit myself to the struggle against the systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination. That work is essential human rights work all across the world. And with that, I'd also like to welcome you to the Goodman Speak On It panel, inspired by the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, a voting and women's rights activist, community organizer, and leader in the civil rights movement. But why is the Goodman Theater organizing this panel? So the Goodman has had a strong commitment to community. They've been really supporting this idea of good citizenship, and they wanted to create a space for nonpartisan, unbiased conversation. My name is Minita Gandhi, and my pronouns are she, hers. I'm an actor, writer, activist, and healer. And today I have the honor of being your moderator with four incredible women that I just can't wait to introduce you to. And we will be exploring, how do the inequities of the past play out in current events, and what can we do to change our future? I know it's been a question that's on my mind. I'm sure it's on yours. And these are the women that I think can really help answer that question for us. And we have this wonderful opportunity to meet them. So let's meet them. I'd first like to introduce you to Rose Colacino. She is Indivisible's voter protection and security lead, where she organized and participated in a rally to help secure $250 million in election security funding prior to the 2020 election. And she has done work for critical swing states. I'd also like to introduce you to Mrinalini Chakraborty, an award-winning social justice and civil rights activist who has helped to lead and build the Women's March movement since 2016. She is the recipient of many awards, including Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year and PEN America's Free Expression Courage Award. Her work focuses on intersectional coalition building. And now I'd like to introduce you to Delmarie Cobb, founder and president of Ida's Legacy. She is helping to develop the next generation of African-American women candidates who are willing to speak truth to power, keep voters informed, and engage political activists around policy decisions impacting their respective communities. And we also have the honor of having with us today Genevieve Thiers, an award-winning entrepreneur and activist, founder of Sitter City. She is also the founder of the New Founders Conference in Chicago and has created the Tech Yourself Guide for Diverse and Female Candidates, which has trained 1,350 candidates for free since 2018 on how to use tech to win their races. So if they all sound incredible, it's because they are. And I can just tell you right now from reading their resumes and accolades, I could have spent the whole hour reading those and sharing those with you. But I know we all want to hear from these women themselves. So first, I just like to go around. It's a crazy time in the world. We'd love to know, how are you? How are you right now? It's also just been a really intense week. So Delmarie, why don't we start with you? How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And one of the things I did at the beginning of this pandemic, I was coming out of a campaign. And as you know, coming out of a campaign in the primary, you're exhausted. But one of the things I said to myself was that I was not going to be anxious. I was just going to go on this ride, and wherever this ride took me, I was just going to go with it and try to do mind over matter the whole time, no matter what came at me. And of course, I had no idea it would be this long, but I have managed so far to stay steady. And I think that's what we all need to do, because there's so much being thrown at us this year that we really can't be on a roller coaster ride.
That's some really sage advice to stay steady. Mrinalini, how about you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I think that's the most honest answer I can give. I wish I could take Delmarie's advice and not be anxious. I find myself losing that battle every day. But to be honest with you, I always say this and I truly believe it. At least for me, even though the work that we do in the movement brings its own anxieties with it, I don't think I could have, stayed sane if I wasn't doing the work that I do, because it just helps me keep grounded and feel like I have something to do every day to, keep working towards where we all want to be. Yeah, so like work and just being in the movement has, kept me going. Yeah.
That's great. And I think something that we're all looking forward to hearing in this conversation is, what is it to really build and lead and be a part of a movement? What goes on behind the scenes, and how do we keep the movement going? But Rose, first I'd love to turn over to you. How are you?
Yeah, I am picking up positive vibes from your other guests, but I'll be honest, it has been rough for us. It has been rough for Indivisible Illinois and all the advocates that I work with every day. And we mourn the loss of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and RBJ. So it's tough, but I have to say, similarly, as was said before, we've been throwing ourselves into the work, and that helps. And also just each other, relying on each other. And when one is having a tough day, we pull back. I had a meeting at 3 today, and my co-leader led it for me. So that made me extremely happy that I could just better prepare to be with all of you today. So we're leaning on each other. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. I think community, we've always known community is so important. And I think one of the things that's happened during this time is we're really feeling when we have that supportive community, and we're really seeing the spaces where we can show up for each other more. Genevieve, how are you?
Well, I'm hiding from my kids in my basement. They're 8. I've had the worst week, hardest week of my life. I'm virtual schooling with CPS, and my kids are special needs. So, I'm in bare feet and yoga pants. I've had too much wine. I will tell you that, like, I usually, and these women on this panel are ones that I watch. I usually follow women, and I'm able to kind of claw myself out of the pit of despair. But this week is not a good one. And I do have to say, this pandemic has been brutal to women. It's the 1950s again. We're stuck in the kitchen. I founded successful tech companies, and sung on the stage of the Lyric, and I'm conferences, and the dishes are what's killing me right now. Okay, and I have to do it. We have to do it, and I don't like that at all, because I bill out at a lot when I can, and you don't get paid for this work.
No, it's such a giant shift in the way that we have been living and how we're living right now, and adjusting to being at home almost all the time, if not all the time, trying to work while having kids at home, pets at home, spouses, partners, or just being alone, right? Some of us have been very isolated. One thing that I really would love to open the floor to is, I'd love for each of you to just, if you could tell us a little bit about, how and what is the journey, or what was the calling for all of you to get into this work? Because I feel like that's so specific probably to each of your personal journeys. What has called you to the work that you're doing? Mrinalini, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I started organizing, community organizing when I was growing up in India. I grew up in Kolkata, India. And I started in the movement organizing for sex workers' rights, and rights for like children of sex workers specifically. And I didn't think of it as like activism. It was just like a volunteer opportunity. But then when I came into the movement, it really opened my eyes to just so much, that I was unaware of. Especially, like, I grew up in a family that, they were quote unquote progressive, but not very political. I didn't really have parents that were activists or super politically engaged. So for me, that experience kind of advocating for, against gender-based violence, that really kind of gave me a taste of like the work that I wanted to do. I've been organizing during my college years and in grad school here in Chicago as well, but always kind of as a community activist, as a volunteer. But really kind of stepped in and decided to kind of make this what I do on a day-to-day basis. Really after the 2016 elections, I was just, came together to organize the Women's March with several other folks that, I've crossed paths with before, and just brought in like whatever knowledge I had in terms of like organizing folks, mobilizing folks, and bringing that to, not just build for the Women's March that happened in early 2017, but also like what followed after the organization and the movement that sustained after it. So it's just been like over the last 4 years, just building that organization, but also several others. And yeah, just it's been a journey.
And just to follow up with that, and anyone feel free to jump in on this. I'm just wondering before we turn it over to learn about everyone's respective work, when we talk about organizing a movement, what are all the things that the general public probably doesn't know about the work and the sweat that goes into organizing, building a movement, organizing it, and having it follow through? Because all of you have had experience with that.
Yeah, I can probably speak a little bit, but then would love to hear from my fellow panelists as well. One thing that I always, I've been asked that question many times, and I always say that, majority of the work happens behind the scenes that we don't see. And also, like in my experience, at least, like no movement is built in a day, even though it feels like, folks just organically rose up in the wake of the 2016 elections, which a lot of first-time activists did rise up for the first time, and there's power in that. There is real beauty in that. But behind the scenes, for that moment to happen, I feel like there were many other movements and leaders on whose shoulders we stand that led us, to that moment being that powerful. And in a tangible way, I'll say that even most of the leaders who put together the Women's March, they come from their own like legacies of organizing as well. They've been, our co-founders have been organizing in the racial justice, like, Black liberation movement. I've been organizing in the immigrants' rights and like civil rights movement, like gender justice movement before. So like we bring the knowledge as well as sort of the lessons from past movements. And I truly try to make it, get this point across that like nothing that we see is like built in a day. We're really like building on top of like movements that have come before us.
I love that. It sounds like, there's definitely something to honor in this line of inheritance of wisdom that we need to really be attuned to, because for some of us, it's the first time. And for some of us, it's not the first time being a part of something like this. Would anybody else like to speak to building a movement, being a part of a movement, some of the work that goes into it that you think people might not know, or your own personal experience with it?
Well, I think what you said earlier, I mean, it really is about being patient, because oftentimes you may not see the fruits of your labor. But that doesn't mean that you stop. You have to continue to build on it and look long term and have a long time perspective on, I mean, we can talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, that's a prime example of toiling and toiling in the vineyards for decades and you see the fruits of your labor decades later, maybe at the end of your life, or you may never see it. The next generation may benefit. And that's what you need to know, that you have to have a selfless soul, because it's not about you, it's about the greater good and those people who may benefit behind you.
I love that you just used that phrase, and I just want to reiterate this idea of, being a selfless soul, and that's really what it is, to be able to push ideas and movement forward, but it's not about immediate gratification, that it's something we may never see. Delmarie, I'd love for people to know a little bit about you. What's called you to the work that you're doing? What's your journey been?
So I grew up in a political family, in that my dad worked at the Board of Elections for 30 years. And so this would have certainly been his busy season when I was growing up. And so we had politicians coming in and out of our house every day, especially during this time of year. And so, it just sort of, I just learned about it. And when my dad was the precinct captain, I used to go with him door to door and literally knew everyone from 31st and to 35th, from King Drive to Indiana here in Chicago. And they used to call me Little Precinct Captain. And my mother could do more on the phone in terms of getting people out to vote and getting the vote out than most people could do being in the street. And so she was his right hand. And when I grew up, I wound up becoming a TV reporter. And I was a TV reporter for 10 years. And when I left that, my very first job on my own after that was I lucked out and became Jesse Jackson's National Traveling Press Secretary in 1988. And coming out of that, I decided, how do I put my two passions together, media and politics? And not only am I passionate about them, but I also think they're the two most powerful things there are out here. And so I decided to marry them and see if I could make a living. And that's what I've done for the last 30 years. I'm a political consultant. And then when I started Ida's Legacy in 2017, which is a political action committee, as you said, the reason I started it was because of the 2016 election. And that 94% of African American women voted for Hillary Clinton, and white women did not carry the day. And Black women have been carrying the day since 2008. We're the largest group of voters of any identifiable group in terms of voting bloc. And what I was seeing is, especially during the women's marches and PACs being formed, is that suddenly the narrative was being driven by the people who didn't show up. And so why wasn't the narrative being driven by the people who showed up? And so that's why I started Ida's Legacy, because I decided it was time for us to carry our own water, since we had carried everybody else's water. And that we need to drive the narrative, because oftentimes as progressives, being Black, our issues are different from white progressives. And we need to work together and stop allowing other groups to drive the narrative and to be the voices of the issues that sometimes are antithetical to us and not helpful to us. And so that was the purpose of Ida's Legacy.
There are so many follow-up questions that I have for you, but I know we're going to get into some of them moving forward. One thing before I turn it over to Rose and Genevieve that I'd love to ask you, it seems like you have so much interesting perspective to offer on so many things. Moving back to one of the first things you said, when we think about, you have this really interesting perspective on media and politics, and we're always hearing about how they are butting heads or how they can work together. Is there anything, when you think about media and politics, that you think this is a way they could work better together, or here's why we are at the stage we're at with media and politics as it is?
Well, unfortunately, one of the reasons we're at the stage we're in is because of our president, who has who's sowing confusion by calling everything fake news. So anything he doesn't like is fake news. And as an African American, we could actually say there's been fake news forever. I mean, but it's not fake news. What it is that people just didn't cover you. People didn't cover your issues. And one of the things I always talk about is, even to this day, I can pick up a Black newspaper to this day or go online to a Black newspaper, and every time I will see a story that I never saw anywhere else. And because that, we're coming to it from a different perspective. The world's issues affect us, but then we have our own unique issues that need to be told by our perspective. I mean, I often say that's why it's called His Story, because he tells his story. And if you want your story to be told, you've got to tell it. And so that's what when I formed the Publicity Works, my company 30 years ago, the reason I did it was because of all the stories left untold that needed what I knew from having been on the other side of the camera. And what could I do to help elevate those stories so that they got coverage and so that they were able to educate and make people aware.
Thank you for that. Okay, one other follow-up question, and then we'll move forward. For each of you, what community story or what stories are still in 2020 not being told that we really need to be actively asking for, hearing, opening our ears to? What are the stories that are not being told right now still? Whoever wants to go first. Yes, Rose.
I can go ahead and start. So my story, real quick, has been quite a bit about voting, which is appropriate for this play. And what we have done is really pushed vote by mail because we feel that it's safe, secure, and accessible. Right now with COVID, there was a new law that was passed that Governor Pritzker signed. And with that, especially with everything happening in the world, we wanted to make sure we had a diversity inclusion lens. So we have a number of different subgroups. I've had the pleasure to meet a man named Chris Patterson. And in fact, I had a conference call with him, very modest man, Zoom, Google Meet, whatever it was. And he was in the car driving somewhere. And then I walked out and watched the TV, and Mayor Lightfoot was giving a press conference. And then there was Chris speaking right afterwards. But he has really done some amazing work. He belongs to a group called Institute for Nonviolence. And of that, he's working with a group called Communities Partnering for Peace. I hope I have that right. And so what he has done is targeted 22 neighborhoods, and it seems like the trajectory is similar to the play. And he's identified Inglewood and Roseland, which is actually where I was born, in Roseland Community Hospital. Mm-hmm. We're all named Rose. And so what he's done is targeted these 22 communities that face quite a bit of gun violence, economic inequality, and he has matched at least 15 of them with nonprofits to help and support. So we've been lucky enough through one of my colleagues to work with him and trying to highlight his work and help his community. Just one quick aspect of voting that we have opened our ears to. I've been talking to election officials, and they tell us with all these long lines in the primary, forget about what happened the last couple of days, they have requested that if we're able, that we request our mail-in ballots online, so then they don't have to count so much paper. So we started talking to our community leaders, not only in the African-American community, but also in the Latinx community. And they said, yeah, that's great, but in a lot of our neighborhoods, they don't have strong Wi-Fi. So just thinking about other perspectives and meeting communities where they are. I've just learned a lot from Chris, as well as Deborah Harris from Action Now, and my friend Jose Luis Torres from the Latinx community. So we're really trying to stay attuned to not what's happening in my personal world right now, but what everybody is facing. And it's a challenge.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else that wanted to speak to that before I move forward? Genevieve?
Well,
or Delmarie? Sorry, I can't speak.
I was gonna echo a lot of what Rose said. My other thing as a storyteller that I'm really excited about telling is stories of women working together, because, I'll say a pet peeve of mine that, I really, really get upset by is every time women are portrayed on TV, we're clawing at each other with fake nails or tearing each other down. These horrible, old, outdated, tropes that obviously are put on us, not by women, but by people that, want us to be a wife or a girlfriend or whatever, a mother. I see so many women working together every single day. I mean, Mrinalini can tell you insane stories. I mean, I've been to Delmarie's events. Rose is, like leading the charge with beautiful movements, that Indivisible's doing. I mean, we have such power together, and no one's telling the story. So actually, my work right now is mostly in production. There's a series I'm working with called Run the Series, which is basically Queer Eye, but for women in politics. And we are telling the story of that local woman running for school board who is just trying to raise X for, like a yard sign. And these stories are insane. You wouldn't believe the trolling, the doxing that goes on at those levels. You wouldn't believe what the NRA members, they stand down every day, and I just, I can tell you story after story, from going into networks, very large ones, actual networks, and hearing, oh, gee, well, do you have any, strippers that are running? Or do you have like an alien enthusiast? I mean, like, what, these women aren't enough? This brave woman fighting gun violence is not enough. I've had it. So, I think there's a story there to be told too, because we've never had a woman in the White House, and there's obviously a reason why. And I think we want to work together, and we're going to have to learn how. And I do want to congratulate all the other members of this panel for being absolute trailblazers in that regard, to figuring out why we haven't yet worked, totally seamlessly together. Mrinalini can also tell you stories for days about this, I'm sure.
And I wanted to piggyback off of what Rose said about in terms of the internet connection. So in 2018, I was doing an aldermanic campaign for a millennial, and we decided we wanted her office not to be where all the other aldermanic offices, candidates' offices were, and we wanted to be in the hood. And so we were lucky enough to find a space at 55th and Halsted. And so I was telling her that we needed a landline. And first of all, that was like talking about Stone Age. Why do we need a landline? And I said, because the people who vote are 50 and over. That's why you need a landline. And that's who we want to get to. And so she acquiesced, and I decided I'd do the setup for her. And I'm talking to the woman from the telephone company, and we get everything set up, the phone numbers and everything, and we're trying to set up the internet. And she says to me, I don't see an internet connection in your area. I said, what do you mean you don't see an internet connection in my area? She said, there's no internet over there. I said, we're right near a university. She said, I see that. So when she said that, I knew she wasn't from Chicago, that she was so she was from somewhere else. And we literally had to run a campaign off of a hotspot.
Wow.
But that was the eye opener. And right at the same time, it just all happened like in the same week. WBEZ, the public radio station here, did a report on the lack of internet access in Black communities. And it was 3 Black communities, Inglewood, South Shore, and Auburn Gresham, where 50% of the households did not have internet connection. So fast forward to COVID-19, educating online, all the problems that we see now are a result from what we discovered during that campaign in 2018. And we made that an issue. We made that a primary issue in our campaign, because how do you ask businesses to come to the Black community if they have no internet, or they have to pay extra money in order to have internet accessibility? How do you then ask people to apply for jobs? How do you, it's a whole array of things that you aren't accessible to because you don't have internet connection. And how do you have a mayor in the city for 22 years who was powerful and could have demanded anything he wanted to demand, not demand that his entire city was internet accessible? And so when you talk about leave no child behind and communities being left behind, and now you've got a pandemic, something nobody ever foresaw, and what that's going to mean and is meaning for our children. I mean, this is an example of how communities of color are not even on the radar.
I think that's a great point. You're already hitting upon some of the things, when we think about inequities of the past and currently, and how do we change things for the future. It's about making sure that stories are being heard, which means we are giving room for stories to be spoken from communities that we just haven't left media open to in the past, right? It's always been very white and very male, and that's been problematic. And we see that, and we're feeling that right now. It's also about access, which is, I think, Delmarie, what you were hitting upon. How do we create more access? That's been a definite inequity in the past, something we're currently dealing with. And how do we change that for the future? Before we shift into talking about some of those inequities more specifically, Genevieve, I just wanted to leave some room for you. I know that your work is really, it kind of ties tech and candidacy, moving things forward together. Can you speak to us a little bit about tech, about candidacy, how you came to join those things and what that means for us?
Of course. Well, I'd be happy to talk to it, but let me echo Delmarie first in saying that it's horrible that you need a Wi-Fi connection, and a very fast, consistent one right now, to win. You simply do, because tech has been a really important part of the playing field in terms of winning for a long while now. I mean, we all see what's happened with Facebook and similar. It's the playing field now. And the problem is, if you don't have reliable Wi-Fi, you're in trouble. But what I would say is that virtually in the pandemic, it's become more important than ever to be able to switch your tactics over to virtual tactics. So I won't go on about this, but I will say, if you're not using Zoom for your meetings and, you Slack and various different ways to coordinate your team, you're way behind. If you're not using Twitch for your fundraisers with the appropriate plugins to ActBlue, you're behind. And I'll direct you where to learn about all of this in a minute. But there are two things people might not know about, especially at the lower levels where you're running for school board or something, that can massively help you, and you just might not have been exposed. And one of those is text marketing. Incredible work being done by, Hustle and similar teams like that, Get Through. And we walk you through how to do that in our free guide, our free trainings. We have 17 videos online. We've got, all sorts of stuff available to you. So I'm not just dropping this and walking away. I'll give you a follow-up. The other thing is social media mapping. This is the most amazing stuff, watching Team Map by Tuesday Company and Outreach Circle map, the actual social networks of your followers and show you, who in your district is a super connector, right? That knows 10 or more people that live in your district confines. You can't knock on doors anymore. You just can't do it. You're going to get penalized for putting a flyer because you went near somebody's house in the time of COVID. So you're going to have to switch all your tactics from going door to door to text message marketing, and you're going to have to also, switch them to, social media mapping, where you can take messages and you can send them through these social networks in a targeted way of everyone you know. To find out more about this, sorry for the plug, but it's free, and we've put everything together for you. It's go to techyourself, techyourself.org, and you can download the guide for free. It's 200 pages, the top 10 digital experts in the country put it together. I was just the editor, and I come from the tech world, but I mean, this was a big deal. It cost $60,000, and, that was donated. We put it together, released it, at New Founders Conference. These things really matter, because this stuff is not usually available, this information, unless you're running for, like, let's say, a governorship or a state legislature or above. And we're not going to get women into the seats that matter, which are school board and city council, frankly, unless they have access to this information at the lowest levels. So women are frankly, the strongest tech users in the country. We just need a guide. And so techyourself.org is where to find the guide and the 8-page pandemic addendum that will show you how to do it all virtually.
That's great. I mean, what an incredible resource to have right now as we're in this, what I think a lot of people consider unprecedented times. And that's, a question I want to throw out to all of you. We've been hearing that a lot. We are in unprecedented times. What is most unprecedented about this time for each of you when you think about that or hear that in your experience?
I can amplify. I'm sorry.
President's lack of a president, which I'm saying is going on right now. Sorry, couldn't help it.
And I just want to amplify what Genevieve was saying. So with our group, we do electoral work up and down the ballot. We spend time in Wisconsin as well, because it seems to be still a very important state for the presidential election. And August of 2018, we were canvassing, and we got up to 200 people driving in, invaders from Illinois, going to Wisconsin and knocking on doors, and how we all had to pivot to technology. And I have to give credit to the groups that were in charge of that, such as Genevieve's group, how we pivoted to phone banking, a little less flashy, but also texting. Texting has been just huge. And there is a particular candidate, hopefully it's okay if I mention Lauren Underwood, was really unknown in coming out of Naperville. And I knocked some doors for her, but I felt like the text banking really made a difference because she's so phenomenal and people didn't know who she was. And with texting, I'm still a fan. We're actually making, I forgot that plug, we're making phone banks into the 22 communities. We have 276,000 names. If anybody wants to help, we're looking for volunteers. Pay of gratification. But with texting, you don't have to face the hangups. You don't get too many of them. More people are at home with the phone banks, but with texting, you can cover so much ground. So just want to do a shout out for new ways of doing the organizing work.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, for me, Minita, it's so hard to answer the question because it's like, where do we begin?
Yes.
I'm sure everybody feels that way here. And for those of us who have been, on the ground, on the streets for a long time, I also try to always remind myself not to catastrophize the moment we're in, but it does, because, a lot of this has happened before. And at the same time, it still feels like, what feels unprecedented to me is just like the layering of crises upon crises, right? Like we have the crises of the pandemic. We have a crisis of neo-fascism that is on the rise in our country and globally. With every week, we have the crisis of racial, injustice and violence, and all of these crises. The crisis of climate change. We can never forget that. And I feel like we're at a sort of pivotal moment where a lot of these crises are kind of coming to a head. And I feel like as a world, as a country, we are all feeling it. Everywhere we turn, it feels like we're coming towards that breaking point. But as an organizer, I also feel like I have to be inherently optimistic. Otherwise, I couldn't be doing this work that I do. And what history and movement history especially has taught me is that from these moments of breaking points also come incredible change and transformation. So at least with everything that I'm trying to do every day is truly step by step try to build towards what that transformed world looks like, that we all want to get to, after, because this, even though this is a really scary time, we know that this will pass, but we have to prepare for what that world that we want, for us and our communities and our next generations to look like. And we just got to build towards that and not give in to despair.
Thank you for that.
And I always say, I mean, I think all this has become a running joke now because I think everybody's saying it. This is the most important election of your life, and I've been saying that ever since I first voted. And of course, it really is this time more so than we ever thought the others were, because of all the crises and disasters that are taking place at the same time. But to have a president who is sowing all of this confusion, and people who actually are believing what someone says versus what they see with their own eyes. And I don't think we've ever had that before, where people are really so far apart on the issues that you have. I mean, really, there's a line drawn in the sand. And you add to that the fact that people can walk around with guns openly. And I don't even know why you have a gun, first of all, and why would you be walking in the street with one? And so you add that, the possibility of violence, to this polarization that is taking place, and it's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's what we're seeing is we're seeing someone who's trying to create a race war. And I mean, I think we've had that before, but never had the ingredients, all of the ingredients coming together at the same time. And that's what we have now. Everything is coming together at the same time. And it really is a scary time in terms of that. When you say unprecedented, this is unprecedented in terms of what we're seeing.
And so, going off of that, for all of you, knowing that all of these things are happening at the same time, how do we look towards the future? I know all of you are activists, and that means you're in the action and creating the action, but not everybody that's on this, on this call with us is on the forefront of that. What are the actions that people can be taking, and what do we need to keep in mind?
I can go first if that's okay. I mean, this is something that also a question that I've been asked many times, as I'm sure everybody on this panel has been asked as well. And I always say that the kind of crises and anxiety that we are facing can be crippling, right? And anxiety is almost always like a really big recipe for inaction, because it stops us from acting, being able to act, because we feel like we're frozen, right? So it's okay to I always say it's okay to step into that discomfort and that that feeling for a while. Allow yourself that time to feel that anxiety, but at some point or the other, as I was saying, we know that this moment will pass, this time will pass, and what the future looks like will in many ways depend on what we do today, right? So I always tell folks that if you kind of think about it, there will be at least one or two or three issues that really matter to you deeply, like the issues that really resonate with you. It doesn't have to be all the crises that are going on in the world. Maybe you are really passionate about climate change, or maybe you're really passionate about voter suppression. Figure out what is that one thing or two things that really speak to you, and just focus on that, and just figure out in what way you want to engage. It could be organizing, community organizing. It could be volunteering, working with candidates, whatever it is. I feel like you have to kind of hone in on what speaks to you, what resonates with you, and just focus in on that, because it is difficult to kind of be active when we're feeling so numbed by everything that's going on around us. But I feel like we have to.
Thank you for that.
And I agree with you, because not only in terms of organizing, but in terms of just going to the polls and voting. I mean, when you talk about Wisconsin, everybody wants to say Hillary didn't campaign there. But there were 93,000 Black people who didn't vote. And when you see what she lost by in Wisconsin, so 23,000 votes, and Jill Stein got 21,000 votes. And so that was 21,000 votes that were wasted. And if you don't vote but for your one issue, as you said, what moves you, then let that move you to the poll and vote for your one issue. Your one issue being the Affordable Care Act and the fact that that is under attack and may soon be eliminated depending on if our president gets his way. I mean, if it's about college education, affordable education, then you vote for that. If it's about social unrest and police misconduct, I mean, find the one thing that you really care about, and then compare the two candidates and decide, okay, that's who I'm going to vote for because this person is more aligned with me than the other person. And so but the idea that in a general election, you don't vote. You say, I'm not doing the lesser of the two evils, or I don't like either one of them, or how is it going to change my life? You cannot do that in the general. Now, in the primary, I always say, I think I can count on one hand how many of my primary candidates ever became the nominee. Because in the primary, I can be idealistic. I can vote my dreams. But in the general, whoever's there, I've got a choice of two people. I've got to make a decision. And so we cannot afford not to vote. It's just too much at stake. And the people who are being hurt are people who look like me. And we really cannot sit back and not vote.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Genevieve, Rose, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
I have to say, I just go back to folks like John Lewis getting into good trouble. And I think it was Nancy Pelosi, I'm not sure, that says we don't agonize, we organize. I agree. We agonize a little bit. We should allow ourselves that, but just looking forward. And yes, absolutely. I'm a little biased because of my interest in voting and my work in voting. And we have so many critical issues: healthcare, climate, gun reform. But if we don't vote, none of that can really change if we do want change. So I'm hoping for overwhelming turnout. We are fielding a lot of questions these days about voting because we do have an expanded vote by mail legislation, which is going to expire in January, but it does help. I do wish it would have gone further. I'm one that would have preferred a ballot in every registered voter's mailbox. We're kind of paying for that not happening right now. But this is a shameless plug. This is a free website, no ads, created by volunteers to hopefully make voting easier for everybody. I like the catchphrase. I wish we came up with it. We didn't, but it's a virusfreevotingillinois.org. And essentially, we're just tapping into the 108 jurisdictions. My friend Jonathan Rogoff makes it as easy as possible. We want to make it easy to vote so everybody has their voice heard.
Thank you for that. Genevieve, go ahead.
Well, to Delmarie's point too, I think there are so many different steps, that people can take. If you're not voting, that's just ridiculous at this point. If you're not voting. Beyond that, though, I do believe that it's time for people to wake up. And I say this for someone who really didn't wake up until 2016, Now, I was active before that. New Founders really wasn't a movement. It was more of a conference, a meeting place. There was an explosion of groups and, we needed to coordinate. I think my movement was Sitter City because back in 2001, I was laughed out of rooms and childcare was like a thing that women handled in dark corners, this $1 billion industry in plain sight, something we handled in the corner. So, activism can be anywhere you are. It can be in tech. It can be on stage. Wherever you are, just start talking, though. Because if you're towing the safe line, I'd like to say that you're a useless human right now, given how much we need things to move forwards. It doesn't have to be huge. In fact, I'll say we're all in politics, right? We all understand. Everyone I see is changing careers every 2-3 years. The stuff that is needed at the time constantly changes. You know, it was lovely to have a conference because it coordinated everything at a time. Everything was crashed. There were a million groups that came out of the walls and everyone needed to talk. But now, I mean, you know, we desperately need women and diverse candidates in power, period. So, I mean, you just find somewhere, hook in and be loud. Or frankly, you're not worth around your standing on at this point. And I will say it.
I love that, you know, we have to get out and vote, you know, that is, and I know there are some people that are going to say, it doesn't matter. You know, we've been protesting in the streets and officers are not getting convicted. We've been, you know, protesting outside of the White House and getting tear gassed. We're, you know, how does our voice matter? We are still not being heard. We have never been heard. Is there anything that you would like to say to that audience?
Well, it's a struggle. I mean, no one said it was going to be easy, and it's not. I mean, imagine as a Black person struggling for 400 years, and every time you take one step forward, something is done to make sure you take 3 steps back. And so, I mean, I think when Black people, I always say we're some of the most patriotic people on the face of the earth, because despite everything that has been done to us, we still believe in the greater good. We still believe that one day this will be a country that embraces all of us and we will see equity. And so the fact that we still believe that, after being shown repeatedly that that's not the case, just says that we're optimistic. We're just optimistic at heart. And so you just have to be in the struggle and know that it continues. And I think that's also part of why we haven't advanced as far as we need to advance, as we should have advanced, because oftentimes we'll have a win and we'll sit back. Okay, we won. We're okay now. Everything will be fine. You know, we got a Black president. Oh, this is great. We don't have to worry anymore. And then you see what happens. We get the backlash, the whole nation. And we allowed white people to tell us that as soon as Barack Obama was elected, oh, see, racism doesn't exist anymore. That's the end of it. And everybody Black knew, oh, no, that's not the end of it. We didn't know how bad it was going to be, but we knew that wasn't the end of it. And as far as the police misconduct that we're seeing, Black people have always known this. This is not new to us. What's new is that there are cameras to capture it. And so now the world sees it. But the world also has to respond, and respond in a way that is responsible and that allows Black people to lead, because we need to lead this fight. It's our fight to lead. It's not our fight to follow. And some of the things that are being done are not necessarily being done in our best interest. I could care less about the Christopher Columbus statue, whether it stands up or it comes down. That doesn't mean anything to me. What means something to me is the abolishment of structural racism, allowing Black people to finally advance. That's what would be significant in my lifetime. The statue can be there when I'm gone, can still be there. I could care less. So we've got to understand, or going through a restaurant and asking the people who are sitting there to give you the Black Lives Matter sign. That's not important to me. If they ever give me the Black Lives Matter sign, what's important to me is that they treat me like an equal and treat me with respect and dignity and give me the opportunity that I deserve that they have. So we have to be clear what we're fighting for. And that's the difference in sometimes Democrats and Republicans and sometimes Black people, is that we're often not clear. You know, 20% of those people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, who made up their minds the last 2 weeks of the campaign, said they did so based on the Supreme Court. They were clear what they were fighting for. We have to be clear what's important to us and fight for it.
Thank you for that. In our last few moments, I just want to, leave any room for any final thoughts that you'd like to share. A couple of things that I know I was wondering from each of you is, we hear the term, speaking truth to power so often, and I feel like you are 4 women who are out here speaking truth to power and helping others to do so. I'm wondering if there's anything you want to share about that phrase, or conversely, we've lost so many great people recently, and in the loss of John Lewis, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and so many others, what do we hope to not lose moving forward? What can we not afford to lose? Just if you have any thoughts about that or anything else you'd like to share.
Sure. Also just going off of what Delmarie just said, it was really powerful. And, something I say and try to remind myself all the time, we can't afford to be silent in the face of injustice, right? Because then we've chosen, as Desmond Tutu said, we've chosen the side of the oppressor, right? Like, we don't have a choice but to speak up, right? Because we can't be complicit, and as Delmarie said, like, these injustices have been happening forever, for generations, for centuries. But the difference being that, many have turned a silent eye on those issues. So I feel like if there's one thing I would ask everybody to kind of keep in mind and remind themselves is, like, speaking truth is really difficult, and having brave conversations are really hard, but we have to do it because there isn't any other option.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts?
No, and I agree. We named our PAC the Ida B. Wells Legacy Committee. And we named it after Ida B. Wells because she did speak truth to power. And that was the whole idea. And she took her life in her hands fighting anti-lynching laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so important that we understand what that means, because a lot of us get in the room and then we forget why we were fighting to get in the room. We weren't fighting to get in the room so we could be next to somebody. We were fighting to change minds and policy. And so that's what we always have to be cognizant of.
Thank you. Rose, Genevieve, anything you'd like to share?
I'd like to add that, unfortunately, right now, and hopefully for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives and grandchildren's lives, voting really isn't enough. We have to participate. We have to get in there and run a phone bank, run a text bank. I seem to see a lot of the same faces the last 4 years, and we would love an influx of new volunteers, women running for office, and more Black women running for office. I think that would be phenomenal.
Just jump off of what Rose said. Liking and tweeting something means nothing. Do something. Do something. Just donate to something. Run a phone bank. Get out and do something real. Because, we actually seem to think that those things matter right now. And we are in echo chambers. They mean nothing. But your vote means everything.
So to everyone out there, I think, the message, to me anyways, is very clear. We have had so many people, including the women right here in this panel, fighting for all of us. And the way to honor that is to make sure we all do something. So get out there and vote, get into those difficult conversations, speak your truth. If someone doesn't want to hear it, find someone who does want to hear it, because somebody will. And I think, this room is full of that. And there are more people like this in the world. And I think to know that if you are feeling isolated and silenced right now, you are not alone. And that is why, unfortunately or fortunately, why all of you are doing the work that you are doing, is because we have been divided and isolated for so long. But now is a time for us to really come together, is sort of the message that I'm getting, is this can be a time for hope. We can come together. There are places to come together. And voting is one place where we can all come together. I just want to thank all of you for your time. Mrinalini, Rose, Delmarie, Genevieve, it's truly just been an honor to be in the room with you, to be in the room where it happened. Thank you.
It's an honor.
Thank you.
All of you. Thank you so much.
And thank you for being such a great moderator.
Pleasure. And look all of these women up, look up their organizations, look up where they're doing the work, and get involved. There's still time. There's always time to get involved.